On the afternoon of June 23rd, 1996, a man was working his way along an alley behind a building at 1091 Boylston Street in the Fenway. He was collecting bottles and cans. It was ordinary work on an ordinary Sunday, blocks from Fenway Park, on a corner the whole city walked past. He reached into a dumpster and took hold of a trash bag. It was heavy, too heavy. And when the bag tore open, he was looking at the upper half of a young woman's body. The lower half was never found. Here is the thing that should stop you. Whoever left her there had been careful. She had been washed, her makeup scrubbed away, as if someone wanted nothing of her left behind. She had been cut with a strange precision, in a way that severed only a single bone. This was not panic. This was not a frenzy. Somebody had taken their time. And then that same somebody carried her to one of the busiest corners in Boston and left her in a dumpster a few feet from an all-night pizzeria, in an alley you could see from the turnpike. Careful enough to erase every trace inside the bag, careless enough to leave it where anyone might find it. 30 years later, no one has answered that contradiction. And it is the contradiction, not a missing suspect, that has kept this case unsolved. Her name was Karina Holmer. This is what we know, and what we have never been able to know. She came from Skillingaryd, a small town in southern Sweden, about 150 miles from Stockholm. By every account of the people who knew her, Karina Holmer was 20 years old and restless in the way that only people with big imaginations get restless. She wanted the wider world, not to look at it, to be in it. A week before she left, she won the lottery. Not a fortune, 10,000 Swedish crowns, around 1,500 American dollars at the time. For most people, that is a good weekend. For Karina, it was a door. It was enough to turn a daydream about America into a plane ticket. Her father, Ola, drove her to the airport in March of 1996. He remembered her smiling. He remembered that she wanted to prove to her parents she could manage on her own. And he remembered her last words to her family before she walked to the gate. "I hope I'm doing the right thing." Years later, at her funeral in Sweden, they read 2 poems she had written as a teenager. One of them, written in 1992, was called Life. In it, she had written that life is the richest gift you are ever given, and that you should never throw it away or step on it. She was 19 when she wrote that. She arrived in America that March with everything in front of her, and 4 months left to live. In Boston, Karina took work as an au pair, a live-in nanny, for a family in Dover, an affluent, quiet suburb southwest of the city. During the week, she looked after their 2 children. On some weekends, she had the use of a studio loft the family kept at 327 A Street in South Boston. It was the kind of arrangement that, from the outside, looked like exactly the adventure she'd come for. From the outside. Because in the letters she sent home, the tone changed. At first they were bright, then they weren't. To one friend, Charlotte Sandberg, she wrote about the grind of the work. "There is always so much cleaning," she said, "and I think I am stressed all the time. This is not exactly what I thought it would be." She had started telling friends she planned to cut her trip short, to come home to Sweden that August. Her sister, Johanna, would later say that if something was truly wrong, Karina hadn't confided it to her. The family she worked for said she had never complained to them. So the unhappiness in those letters is real and documented, but its full shape is not. And then there is the letter that has hung over this case for 30 years. To her friend Ulrika Svensson, Karina wrote something she never explained. Something terrible has happened. I cannot tell you right now what it is, but I will tell you when I get home. She never got home, and so we are left with a sentence that points at something and tells us nothing about what. We will come back to it. But hold on to how little it actually says, because almost everyone who has told this story has tried to fill that silence with a theory. The honest answer is that we do not know what she meant, and we do not know if it had anything to do with how she died. Friday, June 21st, 1996. Midsummer weekend, the longest day of the year, and one of the biggest holidays in Sweden. Karina and a group of friends, other young au pairs, met at the A Street loft and went out into the city. They ended up at Zanzibar, a club at Boylston Place, a narrow lane the locals called the Alley, tucked beside Boston Common. It was not a quiet spot. The alley was a cluster of bars packed shoulder to shoulder. Zanzibar, Sweetwater, a handful of others. And on a summer solstice weekend, it would have been loud, crowded, and busy well past closing. Remember that, because it matters later. This was not some deserted corner of the city. It was one of the most watched, most trafficked stretches of nightlife Boston had. Karina was 20, under the drinking age, but she had a fake ID, and it was not questioned. As the night went on, witnesses agree she became very drunk. At one point, she was asleep in the club's restroom. By closing time, most of her friends had already left. When she finally went outside, she was turned away at the door. The club was shutting for the night. And here is where the story stops being a timeline and becomes a set of fragments that never fit together. One account places her in the alley, singing and dancing, reportedly with a homeless man. Another has her talking to an older man with a large white dog, a local figure who was known in that area. One friend said Karina had spoken of heading to an after-hours party with an older man. Another account put her in a car with men. At this point in the night, who did you think she left with? Hold that thought, because the people who investigated this case could never answer it either. What is confirmed is small and final. The last reliable sighting of Karina Holmer alive was around 3:20 in the morning, near the corner of Boylston and Tremont. Alone. After that, nothing. The accounts diverged there, and they never converged again. 2 days later came the discovery in the Fenway. When the news ran reports of an unidentified young blonde woman, the family Karina worked for saw it and contacted police. On June 25th, the remains were identified as Karina Holmer. Now investigators had a victim. What they did not have was almost everything else. The medical examiner determined she had been strangled. Beyond that, the body told a story of someone who knew what they were doing, or at least took great care to look like it. She had been washed. The single clean cut had been made in a way that passed through only one bone. There was no blood at the dumpster, which meant the dumpster was not where any of this happened. It was a drop site. The place where Karina was killed and the place where she was dismembered were somewhere else entirely, and police never found either one. What physical evidence was there? A single partial fingerprint, lifted from the outside of the bag. It did not belong to Karina. Run through the database, it matched no one. Swabs taken from her mouth and her fingernails gave them nothing. Think about what that means for the people trying to solve this. A murder usually leaves a room, a struggle, a stain, a fiber, a place where it happened. Karina's murder left a clean body in a bag on a public corner, one unidentified print, and no scene at all. If you had been handed this case on the morning it broke, where would you even begin? That question, where do you begin, turns out to be the whole case. David Meyer was a Suffolk County homicide prosecutor for years, and the Holmer case is one he has spoken about long after he left that work. He put the problem more plainly than anyone. Investigators without a crime scene, he said, are just people with theories. Sit with that, because it reframes everything you have been told about this murder. The way this case is usually retold, the mystery is a missing suspect, a hidden figure who got away. But that is not what makes it unsolvable. What makes it unsolvable is a missing place. There is no scene to determine how she was killed, or why, or where. Never mind who. And here's the part that makes 1996 matter. Meyer himself pointed out what a case like this would look like today. A young woman, vanishing in the heart of the city, now would leave a trail. Text messages, surveillance cameras on every block, a phone pinging towers, selfies with friends stamped with a time and a place. Investigators could reconstruct most of her night before lunch. Karina left almost none of that. No phone in her pocket tracing her path. No wall of downtown cameras to roll back. The fragments of that night, the dog, the alley, the car, the after-hours party, are human memories. And human memories contradict each other. There was no digital record to settle the argument. She didn't just vanish from a street. She vanished from a year that couldn't watch her leave. Everything that looks like a dead end in this case flows from those two absences. No scene and no trail. The careful washing, the precise cut, the clean drop weren't just cruel. They were effective. Whoever did this didn't leave investigators a weak case. They left them no case. Not a whodunit with a buried answer. A murder with the evidence engineered out of it before anyone knew a crime had occurred. So when you hear what the investigators did next, hear it through that lens. It is not a story of suspects who slipped away. It is a story of every door opening onto the same empty room. With no scene, you start with the people closest to the victim. That is not suspicion. It is procedure. In a case with nothing physical to follow, the circle around the person is all you have. So police looked early at the household Karina worked for. They searched the South Boston loft. They searched the dumpster at the family's condominium in Dover and brought cadaver dogs to the town's transfer station. The day after Karina's remains were found, a fire was reported in a trash bin a couple of 100 feet from that condominium. A shared container, not a private one. For a moment, it must have felt like a thread. The charred clothing recovered from it was tested. It was not Karina's. The samples showed no blood, no human remains. The alibi for that weekend held. No one in that household was ever charged, and police were never able to connect them to the crime. A door that opened onto nothing. Then the man with the white dog, the figure seen near the alley that night. He was identified and investigated. He was cleared. He was elsewhere, in a way the timeline couldn't get around. Months later, he died by his own hand, a tragedy that fed years of rumor. But the lead detective on the case, Thomas O'Leary, said it as flatly as it can be said. He didn't do it. Another door, closed. That December, a man was arrested for attacking a woman he'd met at the very same club. Investigators were interested. Of course they were. But they were careful to say he was not identified as a suspect in Karina's case, and he was ruled out. Closed. 3 years later, in Florida, another woman was found cut in half and left in a dumpster, and people asked the obvious question. Boston police compared the cases and concluded they were not linked. Closed. And when the human leads ran dry, investigators reached for expertise. They sat down with the FBI's behavioral analysts, the profilers, to build a portrait of the kind of person who could do something like this. By some accounts, what came back cut against the public's assumptions. People imagined a practiced, calculating killer. The profile suggested someone who might be less experienced than that, perhaps acting closer to a first time than a 50th. It was a direction. It was a shape. But a profile describes a type of person, not a person. It narrowed the imagination. It did not produce a name. The most specialized tool available to them pointed at the fog and could not find the figure inside it. Hear the rhythm of all of it. A lead, a flicker of hope, a closed door, again and again. Not because the people working this case were careless. By every account, they were relentless, chasing tips for years, racing back to the Fenway whenever a new one came in. The doors closed because there was nothing behind them to hold. That is what a murder with no scene and no trail does. It turns even good police work into a corridor of empty rooms. So strip it all away and ask what is actually left after 30 years. The lower half of Karina's body has never been found. The single fingerprint on the bag has never been matched to a name. The place where she was killed has never been identified. And the thing she called something terrible, the secret she promised to explain when she got home, we still do not know what it was, or whether it had anything to do with her death at all. That is the whole inventory. 4 absences, sitting where the answers should be. It is tempting, here, to reach for a theory, to close the loop the case refuses to close, the way nearly every retelling does. But every theory this case has ever attracted runs into the same wall the investigators did. There is nothing underneath it to stand on. So we are going to do the harder thing and leave the absences as absences. The restraint is not a failure of imagination. It is the only honest place this evidence lets you stand. There is one more thing this case did to Karina Holmer, and it is the part almost no one talks about. She stopped being a person. In the press, she became the Swedish au pair. One Boston Globe headline reduced the whole horror to 5 words: half a body in a dumpster. That phrase stuck. For years, people in Boston remembered the gruesome shorthand and forgot the name attached to it. A Suffolk County district attorney, decades later, made a point of insisting that her office would use Karina's name, not a description of how her body was found, because the description was dehumanizing, and because she was loved, and was so much more than the worst thing that happened to her. Think about what the sensational version cost. The careful killer washed away everything that might identify them. And then the way the story got told washed away everything that might identify her. The restlessness, the lottery ticket, the poem about not throwing life away, the unhappiness in the letters, the plan to come home in August, the terrible thing she never got to explain. All of it flattened under spectacle. 2 erasures, one after the other. The first was a crime. The second was how we chose to remember it. So go back to the contradiction we started with. A body cared for with terrible precision, then left where the whole world would see it. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe it was arrogance. We will probably never know. But there is a second careless disposal in this story, and it isn't the killer's. It's ours. Every time Karina Holmer becomes the body in the dumpster, instead of the young woman from Skillingaryd who hoped she was doing the right thing. She was 20. She had won a little money and crossed an ocean and written, as a girl, that life was the richest gift you are ever given. The least we can do, while her case stays open, is remember the gift and her name.